Digital identity, the missing key to unlock Africa's $1.5 trillion digital economy. Good morning and welcome to another power-packed episode of Business Week. This week, Trump is back on the offensive, slapping 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles and software. Back home here in Nigeria, the country records its first month-on-month food deflation in over 13 years, signaling a potential shift in the inflation narrative. Google is going all in on AI, pledging a whopping $15 billion investment in India to build its largest AI hub outside the US. And in equity markets, Nigeria's NGX 30 index has soared past 41% year-to-date, crushing the Dow's 9% return and spotlighting Nigeria's bullish equity momentum. Later in the show, we dive into Africa's cross-border opportunities with a leading francophone operator, and we also unpack how digital identity is fast becoming the engine room of trust and economic transformation across the continent. If you blinked and missed the big business stories of the week, don't worry, I've got you covered. I'm Rolake Akinkunmi-Filani. So we start with a look at Brent and the other major crude oil indices. Quite a significant drop there week on week. Brent was down by 3.23%. WTI crude down by 3.15%. The market is really well supplied. Even natural gas was down by 4.76%. Of course, there's been a huge de-risking of tensions in the Middle East following the ceasefire agreement brokered by President Trump last week. That has been a huge driving factor for markets in the past week. And of course, if you pair that with the well-supplied markets across the world, rising inventories, and the fact that OPEC's release back into the market of barrels was not as significant as we thought, I guess all those factors are coming together to weigh down on the market there. And RBOB gasoline was flat at the end of the week. Let's look at equities markets around the world. Of course, starting here with Nigeria, I talked about the 41% year-to-date gain on the NGX. We'll be talking about that a bit later with Mukhtar Mohammed on the show. But yes, it was a sweep of green across all the key line items. We look at the all-share index, closed the week on week up by 1.35%. The deals were up by 4.63%. And of course, we see that both the volume and value of shares traded were up significantly week on week. And equity capitalization on the stock market was 94.56 trillion naira at the end of the week. Let's take a look at equities from around the world. Europe, Africa, actually, not a bad outlook there, with the exception of Casablanca there, which saw a week-on-week fall of 0.49%. Now, over to Europe, as I'd mentioned, let's look at what's happening with the Euro Stoxx 600. The index was up by 0.38%, but the German DAX did put a bit of a dampener on that. It was down by 1.74%. We're seeing some macro headwinds in the German market. Jobs, unemployment figures not as robust as the government would like in that country, weighing down on the economic outlook for Germany as Europe's largest economy there. IBEX Spain positive, as well as CAC 40 in Paris. Now to my top picks from around the world. The first story here is, of course, Trump and China, with Trump slapping 100% tariff on China, adding new curbs as well on exports of critical software from the US market. And this is on the back of the fact that China had also imposed export controls on rare earth minerals. Now, China controls about 70% of the world's rare earth minerals and it's a major challenge for the US and other markets, but countries like Australia and Korea might take advantage of that as they're also producers of rare earth minerals. However, we've seen a softening in tone from the US government during the week, with the administration saying that it's hoping for a resolution in tension. So we might see a bit of a reprieve on that battlefront in the coming days. The next big story here is that Nigeria, for the first time in 13 years, has seen a drop in month-on-month food inflation, which slowed down to minus 1.57%. That's the rate. And so essentially food inflation dropped into a deflationary mode. The big question is, how well will that be sustained? And what were the main causes of this? Well, the main cause of this was a fall in the prices of staples across board, as well as a seasonal harvest cycle, which has actually improved the harvest yield from many of those staple crop inputs at source. So good news there for Nigeria. Headline inflation was also down from just a little over 20% to about 18%. Core inflation was also down. Of course, if you recall, at the last sitting of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank, the bank did reduce the policy rate for the first time since 2020. So Nigeria is in relatively positive macro territory, and I emphasize a relatively positive macro territory. We still have to watch for the key macro factors. Uganda's exports of coffee earnings have surged by about 55% on the back of a major boom. We've seen some supply issues, constraints in markets like Brazil, and that is allowing Uganda to really capitalize on this. Export earnings are now up to over $3 billion compared to last year at the same time at about $2.2 billion. Uganda is now Africa's #1 exporter, a little ahead of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is doing about 43,000 tons. Uganda now doing about 47,000 tons of coffee. So good news there for the administration. This is also positively impacting and shoring up the Ugandan shilling, which is up by about 6.8%. Global Shipping Climate Pact has stalled because the US, Saudi, have blocked this deal. Now, this deal was a deal brokered by the International Maritime Organization to reduce carbon emissions from shipping. Shipping contributes about 3% of global carbon emissions. But the US constituents, supported by Saudi and some major oil producers, have said no, that it's a green scam. We've heard that rhetoric from the US administration. It would have meant ships would have had to curb their emissions and achieve net zero on shipping by 2027, which would have been a tall ask in any case. Now, Europe, China, Japan, and a few other countries were against this move, and the money raised from the carbon credits that would have been generated would have been used to finance climate investments around the world. But interesting development there, supported by the US and Saudi. And the final story here is that investors have sounded the alarm on the global private credit market, on the leveraged loan market, because we've seen a major bankruptcy, one of the largest bankruptcies from First Brands, a US auto parts maker, which was borrowing against its invoice receivables as well as borrowing against inventory. And it's filed for bankruptcy. Tricolor, another US auto parts company, has also filed for bankruptcy. And this is raising questions around the world about the future of the leveraged loan and specifically private credit market, which differs significantly from commercial bank lending. So interesting developments there around the world in my top picks. That's it for now. Now for some other top stories from around the world. Fed Chair Jerome Powell on Tuesday signaled the central bank is nearing a pause in reducing the size of its bond holdings and hinted that more interest rate cuts could be on the horizon. Speaking at the National Association for Business Economics conference in Philadelphia, Powell offered insights into the Fed's stance on quantitative tightening, the ongoing effort to shrink its more than $6 trillion in its securities portfolio. While he gave no specific guidance on future rate cuts, his remarks about weakness in the labor market suggest that easing is very much on the table, in line with market expectations. Now to tech, Google will invest $15 billion to build a data center, a new artificial intelligence hub in southern India. The Google Cloud CEO Thomas Kurian announced this on Tuesday. The investment, which will be rolled out over the next 5 years, will create Google's largest AI hub outside the US, the CEO added. Earlier on Monday, the HR Development Minister of India, Andhra Pradesh Nara Lokesh, estimated that 1 gigawatt project would cost about $10 billion. The deal follows a year of intense discussions and relentless effort. The team involved said on X that this investment was just the beginning. The International Monetary Fund says Nigeria is absent from the list of Africa's fastest growing economies as countries like the Republic of Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Uganda continue to top the continent's growth charts. According to the IMF, these 5 nations are now amongst the world's fastest expanding economies, propelled by sustained policy reforms, improved fiscal management, and rising investments in infrastructure and manufacturing. The IMF's Africa Department Director Abebe Selassie Currency shared the update during the launch of the Sub-Saharan Africa Regional Economic Outlook at a press briefing on Thursday. In France, Canal Plus is moving forward with a secondary inward listing on South Africa's main stock exchange as the French entertainment group takes control of MultiChoice Group Limited. As part of the process, Canal Plus will first delist MultiChoice from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, then pursue a secondary inward listing by introduction, giving South African investors access to the broader pay TV and streaming business. Still on stock markets, Nigeria's NGX 30 index, which tracks the 30 most liquid and capitalized stocks on the Nigerian exchange, has returned over 41% so far in 2025, significantly outperforming the Dow Jones Industrial Average. By contrast, the Dow Jones Average, which tracks 30 major US companies, including Apple and Microsoft, is up about 9% this year, underlining the strong bullish momentum in Nigeria's equity market.